right. So, we covered half of the patriarchs. Tonight we'll look at Jacob and Joseph. And that will wrap up the patriarch era for us. And then next week we'll start moving into the Exodus era. And the book of Job lands in between there. It's a little bit of an enigma of a book. So we'll cover Job first and then jump into the Exodus. A couple weeks out we'll look at the Law of Moses and the Tabernacle. Week after that we'll look at the feasts and the calendar a bit. But tonight, let's talk about Jacob and Joseph. All right, so first two patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac. The grandson of Abraham is Jacob, and we got several chapters about him in Genesis. And one of Jacob's sons was Joseph. So remember, Jacob was a twin. Esau was his brother. The two sons of Isaac. And Isaac did not have any other wives, nor did he have any other children. But the very first time we run into interaction between Jacob and Esau after birth is Esau coming back home from a hunt, utterly famished, and Jacob sells him a bowl of soup for the birthright, which is a double portion of the inheritance. So the eldest son had rights to twice as much inheritance as all the other sons, which for Jacob and Esau, since they're the only two sons, would be a 2/3 to 1/3 ratio. Then later in life, time he's 76 or 77.
Did they trade birthrights, or did Jacob just get both of them? Ooh.
So yeah, then Esau got the lesser portion. So the birthright was the double portion. Esau would still be entitled to a single portion. So with two sons, it would be divided 3. With Jacob's sons, he had 12 sons, and it got divided 13 ways. So Joseph got 2. And
Wait, Joseph got the birthright?
yeah,
How did Joseph get the birthright?
eldest son of the favorite wife. Things were political back then
That's
too.
convoluted.
Mhm. Yep.
And birthrights were a really big deal,
Yep.
right?
They were, because it gave you a head up over the top of every one of your brothers. Twice as many sheep, twice as many camels, twice as many everything. And that was a big deal. So he swipes the blessing from, yes.
So if that means that if they get twice as many everything, if one son gets one wife, doesn't that mean the oldest son would get 2 wives because he gets twice as much of everything?
You don't inherit your father's wives.
Okay.
Heritable property does not include the wives. So you might have to take care of his wives. That was a role of the surviving sons, was to take care of their mothers and such, but nope, you don't inherit wives. So Rebecca helps Jacob steal the blessing. Did we read that chapter?
We did.
We did. Okay.
I was surprised at that. Why would she do that, I wonder? Just favoritism?
Favoritism. Isaac favored Esau, and Rebecca favored Jacob and got along better with him. So that was, crazy
Well, I
thing.
mean, Esau's wives probably didn't help.
Nope, Esau's wives wouldn't have helped, but Esau took his wives at the age of 40, which means that Rebecca and Isaac had been living around them for 37 years.
Yeah,
That's a lot of conflict to develop for a while. So,
Animosities and such.
yep. And Jacob still did not have a wife at 77. So he flees to Paddan Aram, which if you look at your map is way up between the two rivers. That actually, that big map of the Middle East that includes Egypt and other stuff would be helpful. So he's in the land of Canaan. His father Isaac was in the neighborhood of Hebron at this time. And he flees and goes north. You have a question?
What is your? You are?
Ur of the Chaldees. That is actually where Abraham was born.
Wait, so he flees to Haran?
Up by Haran,
Up by-
Paddan Aram. It's in that
Oh,
neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the land of the Arameans. In the neighborhood of the Euphrates River. modern-day Syria. It's interesting because it's when he flees is when you see the promise. Remember, Abraham got the promise, Isaac gets the promise, and it's when Jacob is fleeing up to Paddan Aram that he gets the promise from God himself. God spoke to all three of the patriarchs, and we have this in Genesis 28. I'm not sure if this chapter got read or not, so I included these verses here, but it says, "And behold, the Lord stood above it and said to Jacob, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give you, and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall be all the families of the earth blessed."
So is it safe to assume then that this happened relatively soon after he fled?
Yeah, because he leaves Hebron, he makes it up to Bethel, and this happens in Bethel, which is just north of Hebron, still in the land of Canaan. So it's while he's en route up to Paddan Aram. There's a few significant things to this promise. One is it implies that God's going to bring him and his descendants back to the land. That's a good thing because he's fleeing for his life. But the other thing is your offspring, or in you and your offspring, shall all the families of the earth be blessed. That is another prophecy that we're pointing towards the Messiah descending from Jacob, which Jesus did.
So that's an additional, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So that is a messianic message.
Yep, that's a messianic message there. God is talking about the redemption of all mankind. He gave this same essence of the same promise to Abraham. He gave it to Isaac, and here he is confirming it with Jacob, which is significant because Esau does not land inside that promise.
And all the families includes Gentile, right?
Yep, all families of the earth.
That's a pretty powerful verse.
It is. So Jacob has a very troubling time getting married. He works 7 years for Rachel. He's given Leah instead. He worked 7 more years for Rachel. Fortunately, she was given to him right after he married Leah, so he didn't have to wait 14 years for the wife he wanted. But he did have to work another 7 years to pay her off. And then his wives, Leah and Rachel, give him their maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, as wives as well. Very similar to how Sarai gave Hagar to Abraham.
I wonder if that was a custom.
It seems to be. I haven't heard of it outside of the Bible, but it seems to be common in the book of Genesis. Nowhere else in the Old Testament that I can think of, but common here.
Pretty fan thing, maybe.
Does that mean he married his cousins?
Yeah, so relationship. They're first cousins once removed. They're off one generation.
Oh, okay.
What?
How interesting.
Mm-hmm. And Bilhah and Zilpah would not have been cousins, but after he works the 14 years, he works 6 more years and has that interesting breeding program that he conspired with God with. So he spends 20 years total working for Laban, and most of his sons are born in that 13-year period between marrying Leah and Rachel, and then actually most of them were born in that 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And this was a complicated genealogy to put together, but I'll hand this out and explain how this works.
Oh, boy.
So at the top here, you see how Abraham and Sarah give birth to Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah. She is also a first cousin once removed to Isaac. But they have Jacob, in addition to Esau. Jacob has 4 wives: Zilpah, the maidservant of Leah. On the right-hand side, Rachel and her maidservant Bilhah. So Zilpah has 2 sons, Gad and Asher. Bilhah has 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Rachel has 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, although Benjamin hasn't been born yet. He is born later. Leah has 6 sons, and Jacob has an unknown number of daughters, but one of them, a daughter of Leah, is named, and she's named Dinah. So they're not on all the same level, but Gad, Asher, the 6 sons of Leah, Joseph and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali are all the same generation. And then because it's known in there, Joseph marries somebody called the daughter of a priest in Egypt named Asenath, and they have 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And they are often considered tribes of Israel.
Is that where the word Nasser came from?
Nope. Asenath is just
What's-
Egyptian translated into Hebrew,
I meant
translated
Manasseh,
Manasseh,
the daughter of.
Or something.
son. Manasseh, yep,
That's a son. Okay.
yep.
Thought that was a
No.
daughter, but no.
NASA is just an acronym for the National Aeronautic and Space Agency. But Manasseh sounds very similar.
And Noah is National Aeronautics and Oceanic, not Noah from the Bible.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Mm-hmm. The alphabet soup of agencies out there, most of which are unknown. So Manasseh and Ephraim are grandsons of Jacob, but they're oftentimes considered to be his sons because they get the double portion of the inheritance that was granted to Joseph. And so later when we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, it kind of gets complicated because Manasseh's considered a tribe and Ephraim's considered a tribe, but they're both half tribes of Joseph.
Yeah.
So there's really 13 tribes of Israel, even though we call it the 12 tribes.
Well, which one gets left out? I'm
Joseph.
doing a head count.
Yeah, that gets really messy. I don't want to talk
Because
about
they
that
always
just
do
yet.
12.
hmm
There's always 12, but there's always Manasseh and Ephraim. So which?
Read in Revelation 6 and then we'll talk.
Wait, isn't it the half tribe of Manasseh? and-
Sometimes it's referred to the half tribe, but sometimes they're actually referring to just half of the tribe of Manasseh because
Half of them settled. on
half
one
of them
side.
settled one place and half of them settled somewhere else.
Wouldn't they leave out the Levites since they were the priests?
They were the priestly tribe, and they oftentimes get left out, but
They get mentioned.
they get mentioned as a tribe. And so it leads itself to a lot of confusion, especially once you get to the divided kingdom period, and then 2 tribes go to the south and 10 tribes go to the north. But actually, 1 tribe is hidden in the south, and so there's actually 3 down there.
Wait, which tribe?
Simeon. We'll get to that later. That's several weeks away. And then to make it all the more complicated, the Levites were scattered all through the land of Israel, but they all left the north and joined the south. So you end up with 4 tribes and 9 in some ways. So
That's
Just pull
tribes
it.
are complicated. This is our introduction to them. So you have all 12 tribes on this sheet, and you see their relationship to Jacob, plus the other patriarchs as we've talked about them. So Jacob leaves Laban without any notice. This causes conflict. Laban pursues him. God shows up to Laban in a dream, actually. So he lets Jacob escape peacefully. And they agree not to cross that boundary. And that boundary actually becomes the later political boundary between the Arameans and the Israelites.
Interesting.
I can't believe he was chasing them and tried to ding them for another 7 years of work. Was that the issue?
No.
Okay.
No, the issue he brings up is that all the household gods were
Yeah.
missing.
All
And the
of
word
it.
for that you never see in the Bible, but is actually the teraphim that was in the trivia.
What is
Statues.
the-
They're little statues, household statues that people worship.
What's interesting is Laban talks about the God of your father,
Mhm.
which means that he must have known how,
Mm-hmm.
what's his name?
There was a big
Abraham and
separation.
Isaac worshipped a
Yeah.
different God. Yep.
Well, he must have known, like, specifically Isaac, so he must
Mhm.
have had some.
Yeah. Well, his sister Rebecca married Isaac, so he had
Yeah.
some concept there. Once again, we have a patriarch have a name change. So Jacob's name is Jacob, which means supplanter, grabber of the heel, deceiver, nothing great. God changes his name. I'm not sure how much of an upgrade this is because Israel means struggles with God. but it does define the people of Israel for most of their existence. They are constantly struggling with God.
That is true.
Was there a passage that, because I remember in the reading, I thought it was a typo. They didn't, like changing Peter's name or Moses' name, or excuse me, Abraham from Abram. There was a note in there, and then in the readings, it just changed. There was one, I could find it, but.
Yeah, it actually, the name change gets referenced in 2 different passages I found when I was reviewing it. But then he goes interchangeably between Jacob and Israel from that point forward. So-
Okay, so that'll come up again.
Yeah. Sometimes he's Jacob, sometimes he's Israel.
Okay.
So he enters Canaan, reconciles with Esau, doesn't die. Esau's anger has blown over, which is good. He doesn't go down to live near Esau or Isaac originally, though. He lands at the north. So if you pull out your map of the land of Canaan, you can chart his course south.
That big blowed up one.
Land of Canaan. That one looks like the full Middle East. There we go. So the Jabbok River on the upper right-hand side is where Jacob wrestled with God. And then he goes to a place called Shechem, central north roughly.
Oh, yeah.
He's there for a while, then he goes further south down to Bethel. And in Bethel, he has another revelation from God. And God says to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. An interesting thing changes here with Jacob, because remember, Abraham had 8 sons, only one was the son of promise and shared in the inheritance. Isaac has 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau gets a little sliver of land in the south, technically part of the land of Canaan, but Jacob gets the lion's share of it to the north. And all of Jacob's sons share in the promise, though. The Messiah obviously doesn't descend from all 12 of them, but they all have an inheritance and are all part of the chosen people of God. And so we end up here with a distinct change in the way that God is dealing with the patriarchs and their descendants. But once again, he reaffirms 20 years later the promise. The promise is coming through you, and you're going to inherit this land. So then he starts heading back down towards Hebron after at Bethel. Near Bethlehem, or Ephrath, Rachel is giving birth to Benjamin. She dies in childbirth. And that is why Benjamin is the youngest, and he becomes a favored son for Jacob for a long time, because he was son of Rachel. After burying Rachel near Bethlehem, he returns to Isaac, his father, who's still alive. Will be for quite a while more, actually. And he's still living in the neighborhood of Mamre, where Abraham had been. Eventually, Isaac dies at the age of 180. He gets buried in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah had been buried. Rebekah was buried there. Now Isaac gets buried there. In the passage of the scriptures, the focus shifts quite quickly from Jacob down to Joseph. So Joseph has a couple dreams at a very young age, 15, 16, 17-ish. He has 2 dreams. One, he's harvesting sheaves in a field, and all of his brother's sheaves bow down to his sheaf. Another dream similar to it, sun, moon, and 11 stars are bowing down to him. And he shares these dreams with his brothers. They absolutely despise him for this because they know he's the favored son of the favored wife. Now this just adds to it.
The old man didn't like it either.
And Jacob thought this was a little bit strange, but he remembered it. He asked him a question, "Shall your mother and I bow down to you too?" Strangely enough, his mother is dead at this point, but, or at least most likely. Anyway, he's only 17 years old, and his brothers sell him off to Ishmaelite merchants. So the Ishmaelites, who do they descend from?
Ishmael?
Ishmael was a son of, do you remember, Garrett? It's an I name.
I have no idea.
A lot of people I keep track of here. He was the son of Abraham and Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant of Sarah. Probably the next page.
So these were his cousins.
Yep, pretty much. They could have been cousins several generations removed. Depends how fast. But anyway, yeah, they're relatives that buy him and then take him down to Egypt and sell him. 20 shekels of silver, a little lower price than Jesus was sold for. Jesus got 30 shekels. And then his brothers, interestingly enough, don't outright lie and say Joseph is dead.
And just show him.
They just get his coat, tear it up, get it covered in the blood of a lamb, and be like, "We found this." And then they let Jacob fill in all the pieces, and they left him to believe that, even though they knew it not to not be true. So Joseph's life takes a very different course. He gets sold to Potiphar, who is captain of the guard of Pharaoh down in Egypt. He does really well serving in Potiphar's house. He gets placed in charge of the entire household. Everything in Potiphar's household is in his hands. And then Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him of trying to rape her, and he gets thrown in prison. Does very well in prison. The warden ends up putting him in charge of absolutely everything in the prison. I think he has an interesting run-in with two guys from Pharaoh's household. The chief baker and the chief cupbearer. Presumably, I don't think it's explicitly said, but presumably there was a plot to poison Pharaoh, and it would either have come through his food or through his drink. But in any case, the two guys who were in charge of feeding and supplying wine to Pharaoh were not in his good graces. The investigation shows that the baker is the one who gets thrown out, but they have a few days in prison. They're trying to figure this out. They both have dreams. They don't know what they mean, and Joseph is able to interpret them, and the dreams come about exactly as Joseph interpreted them. Now, Joseph had the proper perspective on his ability to interpret dreams. He said, "Interpretation belongs to the Lord. Tell me your dreams." He told the cupbearer, "When you go before Pharaoh, please remember me." Cupbearer, of course, promptly forgets about Joseph for 2 years until Pharaoh has some dreams. So Pharaoh has 2 dreams. I don't remember, was that in the reading?
Yeah.
It was.
Yes.
All right, so what is one of his dreams?
7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 fat cows are eaten by the 7 skinny cows.
Yep.
Coming up out of the Nile.
And then the second dream, someone else?
Like 7 grains of wheat that are very healthy, eaten up by 7 unhealthy grains of wheat.
Yep. 2 dreams. Can't figure them out. None of his magicians and astrologers and all the people who should be able to figure this out can figure it out. Cupbearer is like, "So there's this guy." Pulls Joseph out of prison, And Joseph is able to interpret these dreams, and then he is put in charge of the whole land of Egypt to prepare for the famine, because Pharaoh sees that Joseph has an extraordinary amount of wisdom and capability. And so Joseph ends up being essentially the prime minister of Egypt. They store up lots of food for the 7 years of plenty, as Joseph intended, so much so that they could no longer keep it or keep record of it. And then the famine begins exactly as predicted, and the famine extended further than just Egypt. So Joseph's brothers go down to Egypt to buy food, and that's in the 2nd year of the famine.
Is that on the timeline?
That's a good question.
Let's see.
Yep, and Joseph's lifespan, down in the bottom right, I have the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine marked out.
Alright.
1715 to 1701 BC. And it is in 1706 that Jacob's family enters Egypt, second year after the 2nd year of the famine. The large chunk of the end of Genesis is Joseph sifting his brothers' motivations to see if they have changed at all. And Judah proves his worth and offers himself up in place of Benjamin, which, if you think about it, is actually a picture of Christ, who offered himself up as a substitute for everyone else on earth. And fascinatingly enough, the Messiah is descended from Judah. And Judah was the one who was chosen to have the kingship as well. So Jacob is 130 years old when he moves down to Egypt. He has 17 more years that he lives, and he lives them out in Egypt. Say what?
I thought you were going to say 17 more kids. I was going to.
Nope. Don't know how many daughters he had, but we're out of sons, so probably doesn't have any more children. At least one of his wives, no, 2 of them are dead. Leah did not go down to Israel or down to Egypt. She was buried at Machpelah. So at the end of his life, just before he dies, he blesses his sons, and it gives almost a prophetic message over what their tribe will be. And a lot of the blessing or lack thereof actually stems from events that come from his sons and their interactions and such. So there were some offenses that he had with some of his sons, and Judah was the oldest one of the first wife who did not have any offenses against him. And he inherited a mantle of leadership, so to speak. What?
What was Reuben's?
Reuben slept with Bilhah, one of his father's wives.
And then it
What
ended
did
up-
Simeon
Simeon
Levi?
and Levi,
Are they the ones that?
they were the ones that deceived the Hivites in Shechem.
About that.
After Dinah had gotten raped, they said, let's make an alliance with you. If you want to marry our daughter, you all have to become circumcised. So all the people of Shechem get circumcised. And while they're all still sore, Simeon and Levi lead a band in, and they cut all the men down and they kill everybody. And
Yeah, that is.
That's lovely.
yep, and Jacob was really upset with them because he said, do you realize that if the Hivites and the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites all band together, they will overpower me and destroy my entire house? It is a geopolitical mistake that they made. Jacob was not powerful enough to defeat all of them.
I'm fairly certain that Joseph was unique and would have really stood out because he looked like us with red hair, and he was, with these Egyptians, and he essentially was a big-time governor.
Mm-hmm.
And they built a really nice estate for him. And I think we talked about this, but there's a filmmaker from Minnesota, his name's Tim Mahoney,
Mm-hmm.
who wrote a piece called Exodus, Patterns of Evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't find this, but he has evidence, and he shows it. He goes, to explore these things overseas, and he gets a lot of Orthodox Jews to help him with some of the timelines, but he basically found Joseph's tomb and his house.
Mhm.
And what's neat about the tomb is it's not as grandiose, of course, as Pharaoh's,
Mhm.
but it is pyramid shaped, it's small, and there's a statue inside that had fallen apart, but there was enough of it left that it was painted in his many colors of the coat.
Mhm.
And I think he had the red hair, you know, that was kind of made him stand out. It's just a really interesting piece, and I guarantee you the timeline he came up with is gonna match yours. Because a lot of the modern timelines he found were incorrect.
Yeah, we'll look into that
Wait,
in
Joseph
a
had
few
red hair?
weeks. I've never heard of Joseph having red hair, but maybe somebody found evidence, or maybe this guy had red hair, and if this guy thinks he's Joseph, then that would be the thing. So,
But
yeah,
this-
connecting Egyptian history with the Bible has been a challenge for many generations. We'll look at that some. Yes, Micaiah?
Wasn't Joseph buried in, was it Joseph? or-
You're thinking of his bones were carried
His
away.
bones were carried, yep.
So they didn't have his bones in that tomb, but.
Oh, but he had.
Doesn't mean he didn't have a monument.
Right.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
I got my book all screwed
Yep.
up.
So Jacob actually gets buried up at Machpelah. They have a big procession that gets the attention of everybody in the land of Canaan. And they bury Jacob up there. And then before his death, Joseph actually foretells the Exodus. He says, God is going to come and deliver you. And he has his descendants swear that they will take his bones up from Egypt and bury them in the land of Canaan when they leave.
Wait, so Joseph knew that they were gonna be enslaved there.
The enslavement isn't implied, but he said, can I borrow this, Annabelle?
Yeah.
He knew that God was going to come to their aid. So that's kind of coded in some ways. I'll read it so I don't paraphrase it too bad. It says, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So, God will visit you. That's how he referenced it.
In this version.
Yep.
So he didn't interpret that as a death threat. In other words, we're gonna.
Nope, didn't know. No implication of any great evils coming on. He says, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. He dies at 110 years old. He's embalmed, put into a coffin in Egypt.
So the Hebrews took his bones out after he died or after they left?
When they left Egypt, it's actually mentioned in Exodus and Deuteronomy, and I think Joshua as well, that they took the bones of Joseph with them. And in Joshua, they get buried in the land of Ephraim, I believe, which is one of his sons.
I wonder how many people were like, this is so heavy, is he really worth it? He's dead, he's not gonna know.
Uh-huh.
Carrying him through the Red Sea, being pursued by Egyptians. Is this old man really worth it?
Yeah, I'd be curious to know like how they managed that for 40 years in the wilderness and
Oh my
everything.
goodness.
But
I'm sure they had someone who was in charge of it, and then his son was in charge of it. and he
Mhm.
died.
all right, we're at 8 o'clock, so we will skip the next section until next week. But meditation homework.
Oh, I better write this down.
So it is written down. We did have this on or posted last week, but for this upcoming week, it's Ephesians 4:20 through 24. They are shorter verses. It should be about the exact same length as the last three.
I thought we were supposed to do all of them. I'm already done.
So this week you'll get a great opportunity to go from
Go back.
55 down to 25 miles an hour.
Start walking.
You go just those 5 verses.
That's a good idea.
Yep.
Go over 'em again. Sometimes too, it's not really intentional. It's like playing the drums. I don't intentionally play loud. I get excited, and that's what happens when I start reading. More, you know.
Yep.
But that can be a problem. I mean, just based on trying that,
Well, the way to overcome that is just simply to, before you start your meditation, read the chapter before it, read the chapter after it, get the whole context of it, and then jump in. Because then you've read it all and you know it all, but
that's a good idea. Just slow down.
get that on the front end. That's slowing down to 55 and then try to go down to 25. So,
Thanks, Pastor.
all right. Any questions on any of the patriarchs before we close this evening? Annabelle just about had a heart attack from a box elder bug again. He has been hanging out around you. I shouldn't smush him though, because that's on your paper that you don't want him smushed.
Dad.
There it is.
I can hear you, my God.
Holy cow.
It's only number 2.
Hmm?
It's only number 2.
Mhm.
You just call him
He's got about 2 seconds left of his mortal days.
Okay, yeah, so the readings for next week. You have the 3 story chapters out of the book of Job, and then 4 chapters that'll capture a piece of the Exodus. So unfortunately, now that we're going at like rocket speed, you're going to be missing more of the Bible than you're reading every single week. So I'll try to fill in all the gaps, but you're just going to be getting snippets. Remember, with your readings, we're just trying to instill the practice of regularly reading the Bible at some pace. And yeah, we're going to be covering a lot more material, a little bit more of a superficial level. So that when you go back and read other parts and gaps, you know where to make sense of it. So, well, Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for what we can gather from it. We pray, Lord Jesus, you would help us to remember the big pictures that we're learning, so that as we're reading and studying and meditating, we'd be able to make greater sense of what we read and learn. Amen.
Amen.